So there's a couple things there. I think just lessons for people out there. I mean, if you want something, go for it, sort of pay the tuition, so to speak, get the 10% fee just to get out there. But the other thing that I really relate to you, hearing you talk, and it sounds woo-woo, but, if you're listening, the universe will talk to you. And that's an amazing story to me. It's just, call it luck, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, but it's almost destiny, really, the way I view it.
Well, I think it is destiny. I also note that it was destiny that was a year or more in the making, right? It didn't, I was actively searching. And I think that some of the things I would tell people is, yes, go for it. But to me, and this sounds like, sure, you're saying this, Joe, at this point, but I believe this with all of everything that I can say about this subject is, don't let just money be the driving force. Because, the thing that there were ridiculously long days and nights and studying subject matter that if I didn't care about it, if I didn't really have a genuine interest in it, it would have been a pretty crappy life. Like, you're building a life, not just a practice.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This is a podcast where I get to talk to law firm founders, hear about their journeys and hear about lessons they learned along the way. And today we got a real treat. We've got one of the top plaintiff trucking lawyers in the country. He became a trucking lawyer before it was really a thing, and he sort of made it a thing. So really excited today to have Joe Freed on the podcast to talk about stuff he's done along the way and what he's doing now. So Joe, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I look. Thanks for the warm introduction. I look forward to it. And we've tried to make this happen a few times, so I'm glad we're finally getting to do it. It's going to be fun.
I know you're a busy guy. We were talking before, you travel a lot, so I appreciate taking the time. So I want to go a little bit on your background. We won't spend too much time there. I know you've talked about it in the past, but I do think it's important to sort of lay that out there. So like I said, you are considered one of the top trucking lawyers in the country. It's a niche and we'll get into that later. But before you became a lawyer, you were in law enforcement. And I'm curious, sort of, how did you get started there, and how did you sort of make the shift into the law?
Sure. The short version is I lost some friends when I was in high school. I had an interest in law enforcement just as a kid, probably like a lot of people do. And as I became interested in, when I lost some friends, I became interested in sort of what's going on. What are people doing to try to stop? These were all DUI, DWI related situations. And it just so happened that Fulton County, Georgia got one of the first grants to start a DUI task force in the country. And so they had an active DUI task force. I had been working for a senator as an intern, and I changed my internship to go work for the police department to try to see what that was about. And, law enforcement is a subculture. So I ended up surrounded by people who I considered friends. And next thing I knew, I was going off to college with the express intent to get a police job. And I didn't know if I would do that forever or for a period of time, but I started policing, and I spent 5 or 6 years full time doing that. And then it's been a part of my life ever since. I spent my COVID writing a book for law enforcement involving commercial motor vehicle investigation, crash investigation. So I got my credentials as a police officer re-upped. So I'm actually sworn back in again now as a police officer.
Oh, wow.
So that I can teach that. And it makes it a little easier for them to get their credits, kind of like CLE credits for lawyers. Law enforcement has to do that too. So in addition to teaching a lot of lawyers, I'm now teaching some law enforcement folks about that as well. So that's the short version. With the way I transitioned out of that into law is I was plugging away doing my own thing, and a judge who I was in front of a lot asked to see me. I thought I was in trouble. And I went in, and he basically said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "What do you mean? I thought I was doing a good job." He said, "No, you're doing a great job as a police officer, but I'm kind of wondering what you're doing." And I said, again, it was lost on me what he was insinuating. But he said, you should really think about, maybe, going to law school. I had actually thought I'd be a doctor someday, which it was interesting because about that same time I was kind of blowing the dust off of how to apply to go to medical school. And I had spent a lot of time in courtrooms at that point in time. And I kind of had seen that, who your lawyer is does make a big difference. And justice is not blind. And he really encouraged me and kind of pushed me. And over the course of about a year, I got all my stuff worked out. I ended up getting a scholarship to finish my undergraduate school, which was worth more than my law enforcement pay at the time. So that's how it all kind of moved. And then he was a very influential person in my life when I came back from not only law school, but then I finished a federal clerkship. He was instrumental in putting me on the bench because I also, something that a lot of folks probably don't know is I spent 20 years part-time working as a judge in all my spare time, which was great because I got to see different perspectives. So long story, but that's how it came about.
I did not know that you've been a judge. That's cool. It's funny when you look back in your life, the moments or the people that come along at that right time and sort of push you in a way that maybe, I don't know if you'd ever thought about being a lawyer before, but, whoever this person was really sort of put you on the path and, you are where you are now.
Well, it's funny because you also don't forget certain things. So something crazy that recently happened, literally I'm cleaning out some boxes in my house. I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but you move from one house to the other house and then you kind of really never unpack some boxes. They just stay packed. So I'm like, what the hell is this box? I open it up. It's like stuff from high school, like stuff like old Joe important papers, so to speak. And so I'm digging through the stuff and I find an autobiography of myself that I wrote when I was in high school. And it said in there in high school, I was probably ninth grader. It said, I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to go to the University of Georgia Law School. And that's where I ended up going. But you asked me before that, I said, I never even thought about it. That was not even really in my, so, it's funny how the mind works. You remember some things very definitively and other things may be set much earlier in life and they just come, you don't even, they're not in your current awareness. But it was crazy. I'm reading this autobiography of myself written by, a teenage version of me. And I'm like, holy smokes. I mean, some of this stuff was like, I had no idea I thought about that in high school.
I mean, that's a real treasure. That's cool. That's really cool.
I think I'm going to let anybody else read it, but it's cool.
Who knows what else is in there, right?
There's all kinds of stuff in there. I mean, I'm talking about, I'll just say at one point in my autobiography, the paragraph starts sex, sex, sex. And that's all I'm going to say to you about it. But I was talking about fighting with my parents about the concepts of sex while I was in high school. So there you go.
Nice.
More than I need to share, but
we'll publish that posthumously. So, I want to fast forward a little bit in your legal career, but did you start on the defense side or did you start out on the plaintiff side? Most plaintiff lawyers.
I didn't. I'm the only person in my law firm who never spent any time on the defense side other than a summer internship. I clerked for a defense firm, Holland and Knight. It was called Branch Pike and Gans at the time here in Atlanta. But other than that, I was in Savannah, was in my clerkship. I was supposed to go work for Holland and Knight. It became Holland and Knight while between the time I clerked for them and the time that I had an offer from them, they held it open for me so that I could go do my federal clerkship. And during that clerkship, I had my oldest daughter. And next thing I knew, I got a phone call. I got a gift from the secretary, actually, who I worked with that summer. And I called her to say thank you for the gift. And she said, oh, I'm now working for this small little firm. It's great. I love it. And I said, keep me in mind because someday I see myself more the small firm guy than the big firm guy. We kind of hung up the phone and she contacted me the next week and she said, there was a blow up at the firm. Somebody became a partner. Somebody left. They have an opening and I've scheduled you to come talk to them. I'm like, what? I'm like, so I went and talked to the judge I was working for at the time. And he said, he did a little hunting and pecking. And he said, if you want to be a trial lawyer, this is a great firm. And so I went and met with them and so I ended up, that's how I became a plaintiff's lawyer, literally. I was scheduled to go work somewhere else as a defense lawyer. And the universe lined up in this direction, and it's been a good ride.
That's cool. So who'd you clerk for down in Savannah?
I clerked for Avant Edenfield,
Okay.
who was a federal judge down there, kind of fairly notorious during his tenure as being kind of a tough judge. And he was a tough employer, also judge, but he also became a very important person in my life, became a mentor of mine, both while I was there and for many, many years after.
I clerked down there maybe a few years after you did. It was John Nangle. He transferred down there from St. Louis.
I know. Kristen Indermark clerked for him.
Okay.
Do you know Kristen by chance?
I don't.
Yeah, she was there, and he was a sharp dressed man. He was always dressed well. I remember him well. He was a very kind man. I remember his pictures on his wall of JFK, of him and JFK. I remember well. He was actually quite an amazing man. His background was tremendous. Remember?
That was such a good experience. Edenfield was there. I didn't really socialize with him so much, but I was scared to go in his chambers.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's why I was hiding over in Angle's chambers. You know, he was very, very kind to me, and I had a friend who was clerking for him at the time. So, yeah,
that's cool. So you started out in plaintiff's law. I know you sort of started out in med mal, but then what I really want to talk about is sort of your journey on what you call, or what I've heard you say, sort of hyper specialization. And before you sort of did the trucking niche practice, you had a different niche practice. So maybe take me through, sort of how that sort of developed, maybe your thought process, if it was on purpose or sort of by accident, or maybe a little both.
Sure. So it really started out with my memory of really the progression started out with me at a plaintiff's lawyer event. And I remember looking out in this crowd of plaintiff lawyers and suddenly feeling, about 2 inches tall, and just looking around and saying, like, this fear came over me of how could I ever be anybody? Like when I look around this room and thinking, I don't have the credentials, so to speak. I don't have the background that so many of these people have. I mean, like, that guy's related to the governor, and that guy has $1 billion verdict, and that guy's a third generation lawyer, and all the things that I'm not. I remember looking around and seeing that person's much taller than me and has better hair, and that person's, just all the things that we see as defects in ourselves. I was hyper aware of in that moment. They all kind of came together. And so from that place, I remember somebody saying to me, how can you be an expert in something? Or what does it take to be an expert in something? And I said, 20 years and a PhD. And they said, well, that's the slow way. But you can become a subject matter expert in smaller things, and you actually improve your value proposition by doing so. And I remember that kind of made sense to me. Two things made sense to me. One was that. The second was, he also said to me, if once you're an expert in something, then people put you up on a stage and you speak to your peer group. And once you're up on the dais and it's in front of your peer group and they're listening to you speak about something, by definition, you're an expert in those things. And so I literally, within days, I went down to the CLE office for the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. I said, who runs the CLE stuff? And I got myself put on that committee, and I started learning about CLE and what makes a good speaker and what makes a good presenter and good topics. And I worked so hard on that committee that year that the very next year they made me in charge of that committee. And I've been, I'm now at a point where, how much teaching is a huge part of my life. I do over 100 presentations a year now by choice while running my firm. So all of that is to say that what I've learned from that whole process was, first, starting out feeling like a generalist felt like an impossible task. Like, how do I get known for something felt impossible. And so niching down, what I started to realize was, okay, so it's easier to be remembered for something. Like, if you just want to be a great lawyer, to be front of mind for somebody in a situation where they need a lawyer, and the whole thing that they're thinking about is who's a great lawyer. Boy, that's a really hard proposition. But, if you're saying who's a great lawyer for, and you zero in on something very, very specific, it's easier for them to remember you. So your 10-second elevator, speech is, I handle cases that are like the old Pinto case where somebody smacks into some vehicle from behind and catches on fire. Oh, you're the car fire guy. Yeah, and for a long time that was my first niching down, really, was I zeroed in on car fires. And then, so at that point what I realized, and I'm sort of talking over myself here, but even when you say something like medical malpractice, that's already really broad, because medical malpractice gives way to, okay, no, I really wasn't that much of a med mal lawyer in the broadest sense. I was a birth trauma lawyer. That's what I focused on, was birth trauma cases. And even now, it's been many, many, many years since I've handled a birth trauma case. And if you show me fetal heart rate monitor strips, I can probably still read them. I can probably still talk to you about the standards of care. Now, they may have changed, but the process of that kind of a case, you have to become an expert not only in being a lawyer, but in the underlying subject matters. And so when I did fuel system integrity cases, the post-collision fire cases, I mean, it's been 20 years since I've handled one of those cases. And I could still, you name the car, I'll draw you the fuel containment system and tell you how it protects itself, from collisions. I mean, because that's what I did for a long, long time. So I feel like I have a PhD in fuel system engineering for automobiles. I feel like I have a PhD in birth trauma cases. But if you broaden that out and you say, well, auto products handle this seatbelt case, I mean, I can tell you theoretically how to do that, but I can't tell you the nuances of seatbelts. I can even today tell you the nuances of fuel systems. So I think that's what niching down provides you is it provides you a way to become an expert in something. And if you're like me, and you've heard me say that my life to some degree has been an exercise in fear management, right? And I know I say that, and people say, no, that's not true about you, Joe. I know, well, it is true about me. I may not show it now, but even now, I'm a scared little boy, and I'm just trying to manage my way through this thing called life. And I'm better at it now because I've had some experiences. But I bet that a lot of your listeners share that with me, because truthfully, I've never really met a human being whose life isn't to some degree an exercise in fear management. So if you're like me and you feel like, the world is too big for me to get known in, one way to deal with that is to make the world smaller. And the way you make the world smaller is by subject matter specialization. And what you have to be willing to do when you do that is you have to let your geography grow. So there weren't enough car fire cases, thankfully, to build a huge practice or about that in Atlanta, Georgia, which is why my practice became national. Because, if I was going to handle 10, 15, 20 cases, I needed the geography to let that happen. The cool thing was, because of the specialization and attendant, that's why I tell the stories together, the idea of teaching. Because of successes that I had as a lawyer early on in car fire cases, I got put on stages across the United States. And even today, even as late as within the last week and a half, I got a phone call from somebody saying, "Hey, aren't you the car fire guy?" I said, "No, that was me a long time ago." And, well, will you handle this case? It's a great case. I said, "Nope, that's not what I do anymore. But I'll tell you who to go to," right? Because I know who's doing those cases now. But anyway, that's a long-winded answer to your question of the wisdom of it is, if you want to, it's the idea of being a big fish in a small pond or being a small fish in a big pond. Which one do you want to be? And for me, I feel a lot more comfortable going into advising clients, actually going into the nuances of taking depositions, interacting with experts, and ultimately getting up in front of regular people named jurors and presenting, if I truly am an expert in the underlying subject matter, whatever it is. So that's how it kind of comes together.
Well, I'm a big believer in a niche practice. Love it. And you spoke about fear. A lot of lawyers out there are scared. Like, if I go down in too small of a niche, I'm going to lose all this work and I'm not going to have enough.
My law
Obviously,
partner did that, Jonathan. When I told Michael Goldberg, we're going to be the truck crash lawyers, he said, "Are you crazy, man? I get phone calls on MedMal. I get phone calls on this. I do security cases. I do, da, da, da." I'm like, "Yeah, do you want to keep doing those? If I can get us enough truck crash cases, do you want to?" He goes, "Yeah, but that's not going to work." I said, "Okay, well, if you don't want to do it, I'll do it. It's just me. I believe it'll work." And, here we are, almost 20 years later,
yeah,
with
great segue. So you went from one and you said, all right, I'm tired of doing that. I'm going to go to another one. And, now it seems to me and others, it seems obvious. Oh yeah, trucking. Everybody wants to be a trucking lawyer. But back when you did it, it was not obvious. Now that, Goldberg was saying, don't do it. And not only that, so you went into something that was not obvious at the time. You burned the boats and started turning away the car fire cases, right?
I did. So the way that happened is, Ford, I had made the comment early on in the Ford litigation that, if they change the design of the Mustang, then I'll stop suing you. And of course, that meant nothing to Ford at the time. I was just some punk, kid from Atlanta. Then, 8 or 9 years later, trial, later, a bunch of cases later, they called me and they said that, they were going to change the design. I knew that because I'd gotten thrown out of the Detroit Auto Show the week before, where I climbed under the new Mustang that had the little revolving platform with the pretty girl in the car, and I got pulled out from under there, promptly thrown out. But I saw the design, and so long and short of it is Ford came down and they resolved the cases that I had outstanding with me, and so it wasn't just a choice that I was tired of what was happening before. I had accomplished what I had wanted to accomplish in that field, and so I floundered around for about a year, looking at all kinds of things. That would also happen to coincide with some tort reform things going on in Georgia, and I was kind of looking at what knowing that I was going to niche down into something else, but not knowing what it was. I mean, I handled a Fair Labor Standards Act case. I handled a real estate brokerage dispute case. I handled a number of things, and then for a couple of weeks leading up to a particular day, everything I saw was truck crashes. Like I literally drove by a truck crash. I turned on the news and there was a truck crash. I even got on an airplane and somebody had left a transportation topics magazine, which is like the industry, rag, if you will, open to a safety related issue, trucking safety. And I was like, oh, what's going on here? And so I made a decision late one night, literally 3 o'clock one morning, that I think this is what I'm supposed to do. I went into the office and started what you called burning the bridges. I started writing emails to, I'd been on all these, I'd gotten put onto all these committees as a product liability lawyer. And I started removing myself from those committees, saying, went to sleep last night a products lawyer. I woke up this morning, I'm a truck crash lawyer. And you can imagine the emails I was getting back because I developed a pretty lucrative products practice. People thought I was totally crazy for just throwing that away. Sometimes I think it was crazy to throw it away. I should have maybe tacked this on. But for me, the commitment to burn the bridge was the commitment to success, right? Like by saying, I'm not giving myself an option to not succeed here. And I truly believed that once it all came together, I truly believed that these cases were not being handled right on the plaintiff side. And so the formula was I didn't care about any money at the beginning. I just wanted to put anywhere that anybody saw anything about trucking, I wanted them to see my name. Meanwhile, I, did some truck driving school. I started studying the industry at as much of a level as I could and found that it was such a unique, interesting industry that it was the perfect place to become a subject matter expert. And at the time, nobody that I knew was focused on truck crash cases. There wasn't a single billboard out there for truck crash cases. Nobody was on the radio marketing for truck crash cases or anywhere. And in fact, I got laughed at by several people saying, you're never going to be able to build a practice in this area. It's just car crashes. And that's how those cases were being handled. And so, started to develop what I thought were best practices. That's been a lifetime, work at this point to continue to, create that and reinvent that as I learned more, and then started teaching it. And that teaching was both a desire to, it was a marketing thing to some degree. If you go out there and teach, then people will bring you into their cases. Some people would rather not climb the learning curve and bring you in. But if you're going to do it, then do it right. And let's leave this place safer than we do it, then do it right. That was kind of the process.
I do want to talk about the teaching aspect, but before we do, I heard in one interview that you removed yourself, you started turning case away, telling people you're a trucking lawyer, and then like very shortly after, you made the decision in your mind, a trucking case, like
5 hours, about 5 hours. I mean, I decided I was going to do this at about 3:00 in the morning, and I had no truck crash cases. And before 8:30 in the morning, I was literally still sitting alone in my then little temporary office because I had left after deciding to kind of do something different. After the Ford stuff happened, I left my practice that I'd been with for 15 years. And so it was just me. So a friend of mine let me have an office in his office space. And I was literally waiting for my one person who was my paralegal / everything person to come into the office to tell her what my latest sort of midlife crisis was developing as. And the phone rang, and this person asked for me by name. I asked her, she even pronounced my name right. I asked her how she knew what had happened, and she told me that her husband had died earlier that morning. So about the same time that I was making my decision, her husband died on the side of the road involving a crash. I asked her how she knew to call me. She couldn't answer that. She just told me, I got your name and your number. And she had my direct dial number at work. So, I don't really believe in coincidences very much anymore. So that was the beginning of it. And within a few months, I had 3 or 4 other cases. There were trucking cases, and it's the only thing I would take. At that point, I made the commitment. And I took some of those early cases that I took for the most ridiculous fee splits in the world. I mean, I'll make 10% on your case and you can have all the rest of it. I just want my name associated with trucking. I just want my name on trucking cases. And so that's all it was. It was an effort to learn and to become associated with trucking in every way.
So there's a couple things there. I think just lessons for people out there. I mean, if you want something, go for it, sort of pay the tuition, so to speak, get the 10% fee just to get out there. But the other thing that I really relate to you, hearing you talk, and it sounds woo-woo, but, if you're listening, the universe will talk to you. And that's an amazing story to me. It's just, call it luck, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, but it's almost destiny, really, the way I view it.
Well, I think it is destiny. I also note that it was destiny that was a year or more in the making, right? It didn't, I was actively searching. And I think that some of the things I would tell people is, yes, go for it. But to me, and this sounds like, sure, you're saying this, Joe, at this point, but I believe this with all of everything that I can say about this subject is, don't let just money be the driving force. Because, I mean, the thing that there were ridiculously long days and nights and studying subject matter that if I didn't care about it, if I didn't really have a genuine interest in it, it would have been a pretty crappy life. You're building a life, not just a practice. So what if you get to focus on something that you have tremendous passion about, that you feel like you can make a difference in? The money will take care of itself. If you just find something that you feel like you're going to be in service of the world and other people in a way that you can look forward to getting up in the morning, look forward to learning everything there is to know about it, look forward to really being a subject matter expert in it. I promise you, the money takes care of itself if you zero in. And that's a great way to live life, because now you're serving other people at the same time you're serving your own ego, in the process. But I can't emphasize it enough, because I get a lot of people coming to me and saying, hey, I want to be a truck crash lawyer just like you. And when I say, well, oh, really? Just why do you want to do that? The only thing that really comes out of their mouth is some version of, you make a lot of money. I'm like, yeah, good luck to you. I mean, maybe that'll work out for you, but it's anyway, I hope I've made my point. And I think that it's so important to find that it's so much more important than the money.
It's a great point. I tell lawyers, younger lawyers, it's a long career. Pick something that's going to keep you interested for a long time, because otherwise it's going to be miserable.
I'm also proof positive that you can also reinvent yourself in the middle of success or what doesn't feel like success. It's like one of the concepts I live my life with now is that, you're the central feature in your own movie, right? Your own story. You're the star of your own production, right? It's almost like we're living in a multiplex movie theater and we're sitting in a movie called Our Life. And what we don't realize sometimes until it's too late is if you don't like that life, get up and go down the hall to another movie theater, right? I know that sounds crazy and too simplistic, and maybe it is, but I really don't think it's all that too simplistic. I mean, the reality is the chances of you picking the perfect thing that you want to spend your life on, like you picked it, you hand chose it, and it was the right thing. Remember, I started out in our discussion saying I handled a Fair Labor Standards Act case. I handled a broker liability case or broker real estate brokerage case. I handled a couple of business dispute cases. I was feeling my way around in those places. I was looking for what made sense to me, which was something that I could sink my teeth in, that other people weren't all over already, and that I could actually go and become a subject matter expert in a relatively short period of time. And so imagine for anybody who's listening to this, imagine if you brought the power of focus into your life to where over the next just 90 days, you spent 1 hour a day focused on one very specific thing. 90 hours over 90 days. That might sound like a lot or a little, but I guarantee you this. If you spend a dedicated 90 hours on one little narrow subject in the next 90 days, at the end of that 90 days, you will have an expertise that surpasses 95% of other lawyers in the world on that one little niche thing. So I think part of this also is, do you enjoy being that person? Do you want to be the generalist? And I have a couple of good friends. I just had a dinner the other day with a couple of lawyers. I'm not going to mention their name only because I don't have permission to do so. But they're nationally known, guys who everybody would know their name. And we were talking, we were talking about niching down. And one of them said, Joe, I don't want to be the niche down guy. I want to be the guy who is the gunslinger. I'm an expert on trying the cases. So I don't care what the underlying thing is. I'm the guy who goes and finds the story and goes and sells the story. That's what I do. And I said, all the more power to you. I like to think of myself as the gunslinger, but no, I like to have the underlying subject matter expertise. And so there's not one way to do this thing called the practice of law. And that's why I think your podcast is so powerful. People get to see that there's not one way to do it. And those who are listening to this, some people may very legitimately say, I don't want to spend 90 hours in the next 90 days. That's not what I want to do. I'd rather spend 90 hours in the next 90 days just perfecting how to be the best cross-examiner I can be, no matter what kind of case. God bless you. Go for it and be the best you. Right. So I just thought that was important to say. It's not for everybody.
Great advice. Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. I do want to circle back to the speaking and teaching aspect of your career, really, but it's also, I think the act of teaching to someone else really helps internalize it for yourself. But, I know you do this. You said you give 100 presentations a year, which is awesome. How did you, especially when you switched to the trucking and you really were not an expert early on, how did you get the speaking engagements and how did you get out there?
Yeah, well, it goes back to when I learned initially I told you about the story earlier where I decided to go to the CLE, the Georgia Trial Lawyer's Office, and put myself on a committee, to learn about this thing called CLE. At the time, it made sense to me that that's how I could get a name out there, is, to first learn that business and then hopefully at some point learn how to be a good presenter, somebody who would be in demand on things. So by the time I came to trucking, I'd been a pretty prolific CLE person. I spoke, within the first year after I started working on CLE, programming. I remember, being asked to speak on I think the first one I ever did was a MedMal, like survey of the law, like the subject nobody wanted. I'll do it, And then, we worked into other things. So, but by the time it came to trucking, I had been on the national stage for a while in the auto product side. I'd spoken all over the place and, was put onto some pretty good committees. But I think my advice to people now would be, and I give this advice still fairly regularly, that that in the world that we live in, you're either going to be somebody whose quote marketing is directed to the consumer. You're like a B to C, business to consumer person. You're on billboards, you're on, social media constantly, you're on TV, radio, all those kind of things. And you see the person who is the client as the person who got injured in a crash, for instance, or if you're a criminal defense lawyer, the person who's charged with something, or, whatever, you're the actual consumer of the legal goods. Or you're going to be like me, who doesn't really want to do that. So my marketing is more B2B. I want to be thought of by lawyers who have a case who they might want to associate another lawyer who is a specialist in. So the teaching piece to me fits both. I mean, it fits the first one, the business to consumer marketer or human, by creating content for you to present yourself and subject matter expertise and, credibility as somebody who is sort of worthy to handle the case, right? Competent to handle the case, has experience with the case. But it also serves the business to business side, because the people who are sitting in the audience listening to you speak and teach are lawyers. So if you do a particularly good job, some of those lawyers are going to find a need and they call you and associate you on cases. And that's been my life. Over 90% of the cases that I handle are cases where I'm brought in by another lawyer in Georgia, or I've handled cases now in 43 or 44 states. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy the collaboration with another professional in a far-flung venue where I have to learn how to be the best me for that venue and for that case. So hopefully that answers the question. But I think that teaching, again, it's like the other thing. If I didn't love doing it, this would be a grueling life. I do this much of it because I love it. I mean, to me, it's the way that I feel like I've made the most impact, both in trucking and in just the practice of law. And these days, I've kind of become the old man lawyer now, so people are willing to listen to me about, sort of some of the things that I've learned as a human being along this path as well, which I'm also enjoying a lot. So it's almost crossing over into coaching, but in the context of teaching, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to just giving presentations, you also created sort of a national trucking association. I can't remember the name of it. You can tell me the name. So you're out there teaching all your stuff. So talk about that a little bit. And then a question that maybe some people are out there thinking, Joe, you're out there teaching all your competitors. You're gonna lose business from this. So what are you thinking? What would you answer to that?
All of that's true. So I set out at the beginning. So the Academy of Truck Accident Attorneys is the group that you're talking about, which is now in its 10th year. But, and I'm happy to talk about that. It's grown like crazy. There's about 2,000 lawyers in it now nationally. We do, I think, the best trucking educational programming that you can get anywhere, because it's a nonprofit. I don't make any money from it. It costs me money every year. Well, that's not true anymore. It doesn't cost me money anymore, but it did for quite a long time. so much so that that became part of my vernacular. But yeah, it's really designed to be an educational place and also just a platform, a community for people who this is what you want to do. So we have a crazy activity on, you can imagine any question you might have that gets thrown out on a listserv gets the best truck crash lawyers in the country are willing to go out of their way to answer them for you. So I'm very proud of the organization. But so for me, I set out at the beginning with a goal that I wanted to impact safety in the trucking world, and I saw it as ripe for improvement, and I saw it as not easily changeable because we don't have a law enforcement community that's big enough to change it, and we don't have a regulatory world that has the interest because of all the influences on it. That's not going to change it. So from my perspective, the way to change it was to make it too expensive for them not to change. Right? Like so I could do that. There's only so much of that I could do as an individual lawyer handling individual cases. This is not a class action ripe kind of an environment. These are single event situations. And so I fought that concept of, am I just going to teach all my stuff to other people and then they're not going to need me? And there's the allure of hoarding and saying, I'm just going to be the expert and I'll present myself as the expert, but I'm not going to share. But then counterbalance to that was this internal sort of North Star that said, look, is this about you or is this about really trying to impact safety? Is that BS or is that real? And there were times when it was real and times when it was BS, if I'm really honest. Like there's times when I'd be there, you know what? Screw it. It's going to be about me. Right. And then there were times when I'd find myself convicted and say, you keep saying this, which one is it? And so what that ended up winning out for the most part, although it was not a linear path. I mean, if I'm being honest with you, it was a struggle at times. But I knew that if I taught that it's the only way. If I could build an army of people who knew how to do this, then we would make a difference. And I'm so glad that won out because now we have this organization of 2,000 lawyers. Every one of those lawyers has been taught things that I helped at least develop, if didn't develop on my own. And then I've learned from so many of those people also. So I don't want to hoard the attention for it. I mean, I've learned, I've taught, I've learned, I've taught. It's iterations. It keeps getting better. At this point, it's much bigger than me and any of the original people who were in it. It's now really has legs of its own, and I learn from it and give to it. But the process is exactly what you said. I mean, I started out kind of being the guy in this space, and for a long time, I could legitimately look at you in this podcast and say, I'm the best guy in the country to handle these cases because I just know more than anybody else does, and I've got more experience than anybody else does, and I've done it more than anybody else has. So I'm the best guy. Now, if I'm being honest, I have to admit there are people who are at least my equals, if not better than I am, in terms of they're just as creative as I am. They're just as experienced as I am. They've been doing this now for a number of years, many of whom have been my mentees, people I've brought into this and coached up and mentored up. And so I have, in a lot of ways, given away, and I'm not shy about it. There's nothing that I hold on to as a secret sauce. If I learn it, I teach it. If I come up with it, I put it out there. And that's become sort of who I am. And I'm proud that that's who I am, because I think left to my initial own devices, I'd be the hoarder. I'd be the guy who was more self-centered on this. And so I guess I'm not great at patting myself on the back on things, but that's something I'm glad won out during those dark times when it didn't always seem like it was the smart thing to do.
For anybody that listens to you talk, now and in your other interviews and probably on stages too, it's very clear that you're very introspective, at peace. You seem to be at peace with yourself and really know yourself, all aspects of yourself, and you're honest.
Got you fooled.
Have you always been this way, or how did
I don't feel like that's me at all.
There?
You just described somebody I want to be someday, but
I mean, it feels like you've done a lot of inner work.
That's true. There's been a lot of inner work. It's probably, I'm 59 years old, and that work is 59 years in the making and still has a long way to go. But yeah, I mean, I've had some amazing teachers, especially in recent years, mentors and coaches for myself that I've sought out. And I think that life is not really designed to be a solo sport. I mean, it's one that we can all use people coaching us and holding up a mirror and maybe helping us see perspectives that we have held on to for a long time that maybe are the only things that we have. Like we can only have this one perspective because it's how we grew up. And it's a worthy thing if you're willing to go through the process of self-exploration. I don't feel like I know that I'm kind of the same human being that I was, let's say in 2002, 2003, when I really started to very actively go on this journey. But I also feel like I'm a totally different human being. And even mostly in the last, let's just say 4 years or so of time, which has been a very concerted effort. I've always been a student of the human animal, including myself. And even when I was a young kid, I was that. And now I'm at a point where all of my life, including my professional life, but also my personal life, is really that those are just the stages to practice being a human being, in the best version of that. And I don't know, I'm losing my words to how to talk about it, but hopefully I'm making the point. I've largely lost any kind of outcome orientation. So it's not really about outcome anymore. It's about process.
And you mentioned earlier that at least when you were younger, you were very sort of fear-based. Maybe I'm misquoting you, but the inner work, that's scary stuff. How did you get over sort of maybe you did not have any fear, but I'm thinking of myself. It just seems very scary that you turn inward and you're looking under those rocks that maybe you don't want to look under.
Yeah.
Pulling it out. How did you get through that?
Well, I'm still getting through it. And, I believe now where I am now, it's not really about getting over fear. It's about making friends with fear. I know that may sound funny, but, we as a human animal, we're constantly looking to, avoid feeling something that feels, quote, bad, whatever that is. Well, you can change your relationship with things and they no longer feel bad. They feel like opportunities instead of feeling like punishment. Or some people who hear that know exactly what I'm talking about, like where it feels like, I'm reaping the negative consequence of some action. Those are usually stories we're telling ourselves. So, I'm not sidestepping the question. I believe that, like I said before, life has been an exercise in fear management. And so where I am in that journey of life is now to welcome the fear as a friend, as an old friend who has served me very well to get me to where I am today, right? And who has had lessons for me to learn along the path of life. And that's true not only of fear, but all kinds of other things too. Feelings of rejection, feelings of aloneness, feelings of depression, feelings of anxiety. All of those are my friends and my teachers now. They're not things I look to avoid.
So I'll tell you about a fear that I have. I want to get your point of view. So, you've had a ton of financial success. You've hit big verdicts, all these sorts of things, and you've got kids. And so, a fear that maybe I have and I think others have is, how do you instill in your kids the grit or the whatever and not spoil them and all these things when they're exposed to perhaps things that, we didn't have as kids or whatever. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that or any?
It's a great topic. I have many thoughts on it, and it's been an evolution. My thoughts have been an evolution. The first thing that I thought of as you were saying it was, whose voice are you hearing who's telling you it's your job to do that? Right? And of course, that voice is going to come from your own interpretation of your own upbringing, right? And your concept of what it is to be a dad and what the duties and responsibilities are of a parent. And all of that is a story that you tell yourself, right? So you could change your relationship with that, because what you're really trying to avoid is something that feels like screwing up. You don't want to be, quote, responsible for, quote, screwing up your kids, right? In some way. So it's an effort to try to not feel that way. So in my teaching and the coaching that I've had, what I've learned is that whatever strategy you develop to not feel that feeling is going to keep you feeling that feeling. Like it's going to become the prison that you live in. Is an effort to not feel that feeling is going to just keep you there, and it's going to continue to reinforce this impossible thing that you're trying to create. I mean, because the sort of nature of life is uncertainty, and yet there's this part of all of us that above all else wants to create some kind of certainty because it feels safer. And what my coaches would say is you're not really afraid of the unknown, you're afraid of the story that you're putting into the unknown, which is your later in life screwed up kid who's looking back at you and saying, if you didn't put me in first class when I was 9 years old, I wouldn't be like this right now, which of course is the story they're telling themselves. So all of this is to, I'm not being cavalier about this. I think it's a great thing to think about. And then it's also a great thing. I would ask you, do you know kids of parents and who had all of this spoiledness that you're talking about and have come out just fine on the other end? And have you seen kids of parents who totally went the other way? They restricted everything from their children and they came out all screwed up. And of course, the answer to both of those is yes. And it just shows you that we're only a piece of the puzzle in this. So to me, what's more important than whether you give to your children or you don't give to your children is, can you truly model unconditional love for your children so that they have a sense of what that's like? And the problem is that for us, as all parents that I've ever met, including me, we subscribe to the carrot and the stick approach to parenting, right? We're going to try to encourage good behavior and discourage bad behavior, carrot and stick. And so we're supposed to be, at some level, I mean, even when I hear myself say supposed to, according to who, right? But it's really about teaching our kids to to me, it's about, at this point, I don't know how to say this, I'm kind of talking all over myself. It's about, like, I'm going to go back to another coaching lesson that took me a while to accept. And that's the idea that to the degree that you require external validation is the degree to which you require external validation is the degree to which you're not really free, right? Because even in this case, when you say, I've got to have my kids turn out a certain way in order for me to be okay, it's not for them to be okay. It's actually for you to be okay so that you don't feel like a shitty father. So you're putting this pressure on yourself to be this perfect father. But what is perfect father mean? Perfect father doesn't guarantee perfect children. Imperfect father may be a better approach. So how do you know what's perfect? But yet you've given yourself this job of creating perfection in something that's futile. There is no perfect. So what's beneath the action is the emotional place of just saying, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to talk to my significant other about, these kind of things. And then we're going to do the best we can with what we do. And sometimes we're going to screw it up, probably. And that it's okay. I hate to say it that way, but like, who do you get to be if you can let go of this worry and just be in relationship with your child? Does it make sense?
It does. And I'll say this, maybe to your point a little bit. So I have twins. So they come from the same gene pool. They grew up in the exact same. What's that?
They're totally different, though, right?
Totally different. They grew up in the exact same environment at the exact same time, and they're completely different. And so, definitely give yourself some grace. And you're like, yeah, it's not all my fault. So
no,
they're going to be what they're going to be.
It's really almost none. Now, that doesn't mean you don't pour into them, but so like at the basic level, what's the most important way to like, I really believe, like, our kids, we teach our children to be externally validated. We teach them from the time they're little kids, we teach them you're only as cute as your mommy says you are. So act cute. You're only as smart as your parents or your teacher says you are. You're only as likable as your friend group says you are. You're only as, everything is based on an external validator. And the most healthy human beings I know are people who are the most internally validated. They don't need somebody to, somehow they've internalized the idea that I'm only as good as I say I am. The only person who really gets to define if I'm smart or not smart is me. Like, if I'm going to, however I feel, I can feel smart or I can feel like a dingbat. And it's really all based on how I feel about me. Right. So, and imagine what life can be like if you don't need the external validator in order to feel okay, to feel worthy, to feel smart, to feel pretty, to feel whatever it is that you feel deficient in. What if you stop putting it on the world to make you feel one way or the other and just create the internal way of feeling that way, right? I mean, I know it's a radical way of thinking, but it's actually not any more radical than the way we've been doing it all along. And it goes back to the parenting thing. Now it's just about just be the best you that you can be and be in an honest relationship with your child, including accepting that you don't really know how to be the best parent. I don't know what the best thing is. I don't know if letting you go to the party or not letting you go to the party is the right answer. And nobody can answer the question for me because we're only going to know in hindsight. And even then, if we made the quote right decision, how are we going to define it as right? And if we made the wrong decision, how are we going to define it as wrong? Maybe we made the wrong decision so we could both learn something from it so that next time in a really important situation, we handle it in a different way. So I have a crazy thought, and that's that you've never made a mistake in your life. You've been conditioned to think about this concept called a mistake, but you really have never made a mistake. You've made choices and there have been consequences. Some of those have been painful because you're a human, but they weren't a mistake. They were an education. And so what I like about that conceptually is the idea that if it's not possible to make a mistake, then anxiety really can't live in that place. And like fear management, my life has been an exercise in managing anxiety as well, which is another form of fear, right? So but anxiety can't really live in a place where you release the need for a specific outcome. And if you acknowledge that you really don't know what the best outcome is, even though you may want one outcome, then life changes. Because before we started, we talked about this idea of the universe is conspiring in your favor, not against you. If you believe that in the core of who you are, that that's true, then what are you worried about the outcome for? You don't know. You don't even know when something that feels horrible is happening. If the world is conspiring in your favor, then that has to happen so something worse doesn't. Okay, so I trust that, And anyway, we're far afield at this point.
I like the framing. That's really powerful stuff. We've been going and I want to respect your time, but there's one question to shift topics completely and you don't have to answer it or whatever, but all the rage now is, private equity coming into law firms or non-lawyer ownership in Arizona and all these things. And you travel the country talking to a lot of folks. I'm just curious what your thoughts are, if you have any thoughts on sort of the money that's coming in. I know big money's been there floating around, but now it's sort of really getting into actually owning law firms. Any thoughts?
Yeah. So in keeping with the last topic, I'm saying the universe is conspiring in all of our favors, even when it feels scary like it does in situations where change is coming, whether it's AI or money pouring into this industry. And, so my thought is that I'm an observer of how this is going to go and we will evolve in whatever direction. It's going to change things. There's no question. But, you can be afraid of that change, or you can say that change is going to create a different kind of opportunity for us. And are you going to be open to the possibility that change requires things to be worse for you? Or are you going to be open to the possibility that change may level playing fields that don't feel very level right now for a lot of people? That changes that are coming are changes that may be better for us over time. And they're going to be different. There's no question. Life is uncertain. Life is change. So I spend a fair amount of time thinking about this because I'm closer to the end than the beginning, but I've got a daughter who just graduated law school. I've got people who I've helped bring up in this practice who would like to see the practice live longer than I will, and all those kind of things. So I think about it in those contexts, and I'm excited about what the future has to hold. I'm excited to see, because I still believe that at the end of the day, people who want to live in service of other people doing what we do, and they want to learn how to tell human stories to other human beings in the search for and in the pursuit of justice, there's going to be room for us. And the people who are looking at this only as a business and primarily as a way to it is all about the money. Well, first of all, it's not who I am. And some people say, well, of course, that's not where you are. You can say that from a place of not needing money. Fair, guilty, thankfully guilty. But I really still believe it to be true. It's going to change. The world's going to change. That anxiety that you feel about it, what if you changed your relationship with it and said, it's an opportunity? And can we just go day to day with that as an opportunity and not get so worried about when we live with anxiety about the future is going to be terrible, then you're living that future right now, today. You're living in what feels like terrible. How about just we're living right now, things are changing. Let's be excited about what the future has to hold. Let's continue to hone our craft and be the best us that we can be. And it's going to be okay. The world works itself out. It's going to be okay. And if things change radically, then you will too. You have all the tools to change with it. That's my thought about it.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. That was good. Joe, thanks for coming on, man. This has been real fun. I know it took a while to make it happen. For people out there that want to find you, get in touch with you, what's the best way?
The best way to get me is by email, probably, joe@freedgoldberg.com, or everybody seems to have my cell phone number. It's 404-429-6677. Please don't spam me. I get enough of that. But
Brave man.
I really do. For those of you for those of your listeners who something resonated in what I said and they really would like to have a conversation with me, please don't think I'm not accessible. I enjoy having the conversations. And if I have the time, I'd love to talk to you. If I don't, I'll tell you that I can't now, but we'll find another time. So with that, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on with you. And I really love the work that you're doing here. I think that it's showing people the different ways that you can do this thing called the practice of law, and look at all the different ways you can reach successes, right? Like one person's success does not have to be the only, path to it. And I think you're holding a great mirror up for all of us to keep that in mind, that the people who are most successful, I've noticed this in listening to different people on the, podcasts, is they're people who find a way to be them and also be lawyers, right? Like they're bringing their best self to the practice. And that seems to be the real underlying secret sauce, is how can you be you in the most authentic way possible and bring that to the practice? And then magic happens, right?
Joe, that's awesome. Thanks again, man. Enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.